Thank you for joining us to learn more about current challenges and future prospects for combating human trafficking in Hawaii and the Asia Pacific, and how we can all work together to move our society closer to a world without slavery. This forum is a collaborative project of the East-West Center's Asia Pacific Leadership Program, International Relations Team, the Pacific and Asian Affairs Council, and the Pacific Gateway Center. It's been a pleasure for us to work closely with the APLP IR team this fall, and today's forum is part of their Learning Lab project. This project is in line with our mission of promoting a greater awareness and understanding of international affairs and to develop the next generation of leaders. We do this through forums like this one, the International Visitor Program, as well as our statewide high school global education program. Before I turn things over to the APLP team, I would like to acknowledge Director Wendy Chang and Senior Immigration Officer Vivian Chang, who are representing Director General V.C. Chu of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office here in Honolulu. Honorary Consul of Tonga, Annie Kaneshiro. Senator Suzanne Chan-Oakland. Representative Carl Rose. And of course today's speakers, Dr. Yang and Ms. Dofi. And so now I'd like to turn things over to Naisho. He's part of the APLP team, and he's your MC for today.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Also, let me take this opportunity to introduce Jill Takasaki, Executive Director of Pacific Asian Affairs Council. Jill. We also have with us Karen Knudsen, Executive Director, External Relations, East West Center. Again, thank you for coming over. Before we go on to specific speakers, I would just like to share this particular concept which has ultimately resulted in this event. It started about 3 months back during what we call Learning Labs, which Jill mentioned, which is nothing else but an action-oriented learning project. So we had about 30-35 young leaders, which we call the Asia Pacific Leadership Program at the East West Center, who were sitting together and were talking about certain challenging projects or challenging issues that were facing Hawaii in particular and Asia Pacific in general. So they ranged from things like energy crisis, food security, human trafficking, and lots of other issues, education, and so on and so forth. Our team, which consists of 6 individuals from countries as diverse as Afghanistan, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and if I'm missing any, Iran. And then we got together as international relations team and were collaborating with PAAC on issues again which we felt were causing a challenge for Hawaii and Asia Pacific. And it didn't take us long through our research and through our interactions that human trafficking was a burning issue. And even though none of us in the team specialize in this at all, I mean, I'm from business and there's somebody else who's a conflict resolution expert and somebody who's a civil servant and so on and so forth. We didn't specialize in it, but I think that's the biggest challenge for all of us. At APLP, we taught to basically get into positions of leadership with issues which we're not comfortable with. And I think that's what leadership is all about. If you're a leader in a situation which you're comfortable, that's not really leadership. It's about being in uncomfortable situations. It's about learning, unlearning, and then relearning. And that's what this entire experience was for us. So this event started off on basic level of interactions. We went all over the world discussing this is what we should cover and this is what we should cover. But ultimately we zeroed down on human trafficking as a topic and focused on Hawaii in particular and Asia Pacific in general. And we're actually glad as a team that we did it. Because when we researched, and obviously our research was primarily on the internet and interactions with people and audiences like you, sometimes on the street, we also went to the East Coast on our field study and interacted with people over there as well. Facts like 27 million men, women, and children communities being involved in trafficking all across the world, according to UN estimate, that really makes it the second largest crime in the world. And I think events such as this are just a very small step in the larger direction of combating this crime, if I could say so, over a period of time. Without further ado, may I now take this opportunity to call upon our first speaker for the day, Dr. Tin Myang Thien, who's the Executive Director for Pacific Gateway Center. I'm not a Burmese, so I'm sorry if I
it's okay.
Apologies for that. If you could just share your thoughts on us, a brief introduction on the speaker. She comes with about 25 years of experience in community and economic development, serving both in national and international organizations. The lady here is involved in overseeing 14 community-based programs assisting immigrants, refugees, and low-income individuals to succeed in their efforts to become economically and socially self-sufficient. I invite you, ma'am, to please share your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Aloha, everyone. Welcome to the Pacific Gateway Center's Lemongrass Cafe. I would like to make sure that everybody knows this collaboration is for the first time being held here between the East-West Center, the Pacific Asian Affairs Council, and Pacific Gateway Center. We're here to discuss a topic that is not necessarily pleasant, but it is a very important one. And we have a super duper geek over there who is, yes, that's Daryl, and he will be managing the PowerPoint presentation wirelessly. I'm so impressed. The topic speaks to greed, it speaks to social justice and exploitation, but slavery is nothing new. Throughout human history, we have had slavery, and this short video will remind you of what has happened before. Today, we think slavery has been abolished, but it has not. We call it human trafficking, and more communities are aware of it, and they are taking stands against it. Of course, they don't use the same methods that they did a long time ago in the 1800s, but the methods are much more sophisticated. You know, obviously you don't go into a village and by force get them onto a ship and bring them over. That's not the way they do that. There are many forms of exploitation, and it can be somewhat cultural because it means that you get somebody isolated from that person's network and means of getting help. In India, for example, in certain parts of India, they have wives who are burned by the families if they don't do things or do works or tasks exactly the way they want it done. And they are punished in many ways. And one of the examples that we have given here is of a woman who was burned by her father-in-law for not cleaning her husband's clothes properly. In Bangladesh, a woman is required to go and live in the village of her husband, and there she's isolated from her own family and many times exploited. We came across a very strange case where we thought it would never happen. This is a case in the mainland continental United States where groups of people from Samoa were brought over for entertainment. And they did that, but they were exploited, they were not paid. They all did it because they thought that they were doing it for their culture, And the person who brought them over and exploited them was the uncle. And so exploitation happens in a variety of forms by different types of people, some that you don't even expect. You will have children who are exploited for labor. You have people brought over for domestic servitude. And you have, of course, the sexual exploitation of young girls brought over from another place. As the program, or rather the problem, started to grow and grow, United Nations took notice, and in the year 2000, in Italy, they decided on a protocol to prevent more trafficking from happening. And they came out with protocols to prevent, suppress, and punish anybody who was trafficking other persons, especially women and children. The US has its own definition, and it split it in two. One on the transportation of people for labor trafficking, and the second one on the sexual exploitation. And they added also a limitation on age, which, by the way, I don't agree, because I think there are women who have been brought over above 18 years of age that have been exploited for sexual purposes. In the US, they defined it to say that the exploitation or prostitution of others and other exploitation and forced labor, but they added another thing which really is shocking, and that is the removal of organs. This is something that you wouldn't think about, but this is a very expensive commodity that we know happened in India, but also is happening here. And there's an example that I know of personally that was reported to me by a Burmese girl who was trafficked into Thailand, and she was held down while they put leeches on her because they wanted the blood. I guess it was the blood of a virgin, and that was to be used for medicinal purposes. And so she was, you know, this is a different type of exploitation, but there are many, many kinds. If you look at the trafficking patterns, it is one clearly shows that it's poverty that is the real reason, and people from poverty-stricken nations will go to a developed country because they think that they are going to earn a lot of money, help their families, and earn a living. And they are not given the promises that they were, or rather, they were not helped into another area where they could get away from them. Most of them have to do with language, isolation, and not being able to get to the network of friends who can help them. In labor trafficking, they usually have people who will come with promises of high wages, but actually they paid very low. And sometimes the arrangement is if they don't have the money, they will go into debt, and then they find out that they can never repay that debt back. Children and women are trafficked for sex exploitation. And Thailand and Brazil have been named by the UN as the worst in dealing with sex trafficking, especially of children. Children are sometimes also exploited for adoption and kidnapped, and in some very sad cases, they are sold by their own families. How it works nowadays is that there's international agents in 2 countries. There'll be brokers from both countries, one from the one side and the other, and there will be an employer in one country that has a broker, and then there'll be eager workers on the other side who will also go through the broker. The brokers promise all kinds of things to get them into their trap. And the industries that use them are garment factories, you have fishing industries, agriculture, we have construction, restaurants, and entertainment, as well as domestic servitude. There are several things that have to happen in order for trafficking to take place. One is that the people can't speak the language. So they cannot go somewhere and tell people what's happening to them. They're usually kept in isolation, wages are not paid, and physical abuse is kept to keep them under control, and the victims are too scared to take steps to free themselves, and they don't know where to turn. How we find out is when actually an accident happens or somebody is hurt to the point that they are taken to an emergency room, and that's when the case breaks, when we have an interpretation and translation. Workers come in and they find out what's actually happening. How many of you believe that trafficking exists only in the mainland? The highest state is Hawaii, and we have the shame of having the largest number from the garment workers case, the restaurant workers case, the rock wall case where Tongans were used for trafficking, and of course right now we're going through the agricultural workers case. There are resources for centers that the United States government has set up, one of which is the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. The phone number is there. You can call 24 hours. They do have interpreters, and they can answer your call 24/7. Pacific Gateway Center also is one of the centers. Our number is there. And we have a website, which is 808halt.com. And our partners, we have a number of partners. First Canoe, Pacific Gateway Center, the Word International Ministries of Hawaii, the Thai Wat Damavira, and the Wat Lao, and the Myanmar Association of Hawaii. So there are resources. We provide access to attorneys. We provide cash assistance, and we try to get them housing and also help them get jobs and get them back on their feet. So without much further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to Grace.
Just to remind the audience, we will have a joint question and answer session after both the speakers have spoken. Now, to move on to the next speaker, we have amongst us Ms. Grace Michiko Nowiki, if I've got your name correct, hopefully. She's an immigration attorney who's received her degree in law from William S. Richardson School of Law at Hawaii itself. She's worked closely with the Hawaiian Immigrant Justice Center to assist immigrant victims of domestic violence, and she continues to assist immigrant victims to realizing their dreams of coming to America and legalizing their status in America. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Grace Michiko Nowiki.
Good afternoon, everyone. As in the introduction, I am an immigration attorney here in Honolulu, Hawaii. My affiliation with the Pacific Gateway Center has just begun recently. So I have been asked to help the victims of trafficking to adjust their legal status here in the US in order to fulfill that initial promise that the recruiters gave to them when they came to the US. That is, to grab that American dream and make a better life for themselves. My work with victims of human trafficking has only been a recent part of my practice. As in my introduction, since a law student, I have always worked with the Hawaii Immigrant Legal Justice Center in assisting victims of domestic violence under the mentorship of Colleen Ching. I find many commonalities between the two, but the biggest one is there are people that are in need of help and they're victims. And the legal aspect of the whole problem is it's a crime and we have to do something about it. And the US government has stepped in both cases. For the victims of domestic violence, the VAWA. For the victims of human trafficking, it's the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act, which makes it illegal for people to traffic or recruit people and to force them into labor. And when this has happened, the US government and the USCIS immigration authorities have stepped up to the plate recently, thank goodness, and have made ways for people to be helped legally and be able to stay here. So today I'm going to talk about the legal aspects. I have to apologize. Some of my initial slides are similar to Dr. Miang's slides in the sense that it kind of goes over the basic law. As you see right here, the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Acts, it allows trafficking survivors to stay in the US and give them the route to permanent legal status tied to their cooperation with law enforcement. Who's my, but who's doing it for me? Oh, okay, thanks. Trafficking as defined by federal law, there are severe forms of trafficking in persons. Just as Dr. Mann spoke of, it's basically the sex trafficking and then the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining persons for labor or services through force, fraud, coercion, for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or as we all know it, slavery. The elements of human trafficking. The process is recruiting, harboring, moving, or obtaining by force, fraud, or coercion. And the end result becomes involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, or commercial sex acts. There are various types of trafficking methods, and Dr. Miang touched upon this. Most victims do not realize that this is what's waiting for them when they come over here. They come to them and very, very, I guess, how would you say it, prospects of the American dream. Come, I'll take you to America. The American dream's waiting for you. It's a better life. And because the people, the victims, are naive. It's unfortunate, but they are naive, and they're just hoping and wanting something better for their families. They take that risk. And these are some of the ways that people are lured into human trafficking and become victims. You have employment agencies, travel agencies, entertainment companies, marriage agencies. They lure people in the hopes of finding that one true love. Travel documents, when some people are already here and their status is gone and they don't want to go home. They come up and recruit and say, look, we can do something with your visa. We can get you a visa. As an immigration attorney, I've heard it all. It doesn't have to even be in human trafficking cases, where there are many employers out there that will tell them, I know so-and-so. I can get you a visa. I can get you the documents. Just come work for me. Well, they do go work for them, and what happens? Because they don't know, and the employer does not show them all their paperwork, they are kind of stuck there, forced to do whatever that employer asks them to do. And there's also government corruption within the countries themselves, selling off their own people, or families actually selling their own children. It happens in a number of different industries. These are just a few: agricultural, construction, domestic work, factories, fishery, hotel or tourist industry. That's our #1 industry here in Hawaii. The restaurant business and the sex industry. How do you identify a trafficking survivor? This is very difficult, but because Hawaii has a problem, I think it's important that everybody be aware of it so that we can help find the victims, so that we can help get them the proper help. It's when they don't really understand a lot about their immigration status. That tends to be a big clue for myself. But as I spoke earlier of some of the common industries, a lot of the people here in Hawaii recently, the farmers, been brought over from Thailand, forced to work into a situation of slavery. They're recruited, brought over, people that are detained, you can tell that never get out very often, young women who are housekeepers but kept in the home and not allowed to come out. You can see the telltale signs. If you notice them, I really ask all of you to reach out to the Pacific Gateway Center and Dr. Miang and her team here. They can work miracles. All they need is a little bit of help with extra pairs of eyes out there. This is just the continuation of the slide, just some of the other things that you can notice. Abuse, physical, psychological abuse, labor law violations, not being paid directly, or they're saying, oh, I'm working off a debt, things like that. Okay, moving on. After Dr. Miang and her wonderful team finds the victims, they usually come to me. And that's when we start working hard to make these people more psychologically stable, and that's their side. And for me, to make sure their immigration status is legal and they can continue to pursue the life that they were promised. There are two forms of immigration relief for victims of human trafficking. One is continued presence, and the other one is the T visa. The first, the continued presence. In order to be allowed the continued presence status, you have to aid in the prosecution of your traffickers, and you can then receive temporary relief while you're aiding in the prosecution of the case. In this case, if somebody comes to me and we need to go to continued presence, we have to go directly to the federal law enforcement agency, and that's usually the FBI, and they have to directly petition the Department of Homeland Security for us. The FBI office here is wonderful. They're overworked. It takes them a little bit of time, but they do their best, and I really applaud them. The next form of immigration relief is the T visa, and that's where I can help directly. They have to be physically present here in the US in order to apply for this, and they have to be a victim of either sex trafficking or human trafficking. As Dr. Miang went over earlier, the sex trafficking is a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, coercion, or which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained the age of 18. I don't agree with that either. Unfortunately, the laws kind of go sideways, and it goes back to 18 being the age of consent. Hopefully, it will change. The second one is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. Now, in order to apply for this T visa, the applicant or victim has to be a victim of severe form of trafficking. The applicant has to have been physically present in the US and has complied with any reasonable request for assistance in the investigation and prosecution of acts of trafficking in persons. And this is sometimes the hard one. The applicant will suffer extreme hardship involving unusual and severe harm upon removal. The hardship does not have to be related to the trafficking itself, but it has to be some reason why they cannot return home. In our cases with the farmers from the Alun Farms case, Their biggest hardship is the fact that they have borrowed money from people in order to pay their recruiters to come here. They have a huge debt. And if they return home without being able to pay for that debt, then they themselves, their families, everything they've known is in danger of these people coming back and asking for their money. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, it's not like the bank here in the US and they just take away your property. They'll take away family, they'll take away your life, whatever. And so that becomes extreme hardship in the case for a T visa. But they have to be here in order for us to help them. Next. Physical presence in US. This is sometimes what causes a slight difficulty, not something we can't overcome, but when the immigration comes up and says they have to have been physically present, I have to show more than that they've just been here. I have to show that they were here because they were trafficked in, and because they recently escaped or were rescued, and they were present in the US as a direct result of the past trafficking. Another one, they must have no opportunity to depart. So in cases where they are rescued and they are brought to us directly right afterwards, then this opportunity to depart doesn't really come into play. But sometimes we have victims who have been able to escape from their traffickers. And it's a year or two after that they finally come to the help of the Pacific Gateway Center. Then we have to be able to prove that they had no way to go home. Because if immigration comes back and says, well, you escaped, you can go home. You could have gone home, but you didn't, and you just stayed here illegally. Then we have a higher hurdle to overcome. And last, this is for any visa, not only this one, during the whole process, we can't have them leave. And so that becomes a very hard situation for a lot of our victims because it keeps them away from their family. And until we get the T visa approved for the actual victim, we cannot apply for the visas for their families to come here and join them afterwards. So it takes a while, and that parting with their families becomes extremely hard. A few facts about the T visas. Once the T visa has been granted, you can apply for a status to lawful permanent residence after a continuous period of at least 3 years since your first date of admission as the T1 immigrant. Excuse me, T1 non-immigrant. Or you've been continuously present here in the US and the case in which you were assisting has been determined to be complete, whichever period is less. Complete means that could be done, your trafficker's found guilty, sent to jail, or it could mean, like in the case that we've had this past on the Loon Farms, the cases are getting dismissed on a technicality. Now, in these cases, the victims who are standing up to assist the Attorney General's office to help prosecute their traffickers are not penalized by the fact that a lot of times these cases get dismissed on a separate technicality. So that's where there is a kind of a safety net for the T visa. Now, following the approval of the T visa for the victim, as it's written up here, we can petition for their spouse and their children who are under 21. And then they can also apply for public benefits assistance. Annually, there is a cap of only 5,000 T visas that are appropriated, but there are plenty left, and so there's no waiting in line like there are for some other visas. And in the end, just as I said, the criminal case does not determine the eligibility. It's the assistance in the prosecution of the case. Now, following the T visa approval, or once we get the case certified or get a prima facie approval where we send in everything and we show that they are recognized to be victims who are assisting in the prosecution of a case, there are many forms of benefits that are allowable. Child victims of human trafficking under the age of 18 are immediately eligible for benefits. They do not have to apply for the T visa. And this is something that Dr. Myung's office also helps with for such victims. Once that you receive proof, then the letter can be sent to all the appropriate departments and all the appropriate services can be given out. Certified eligible victims can receive benefits such as the ones that are on this slide: housing or shelter assistance, English language training, food assistance, health care, income, mental health, employment assistance, and just assistance for victims of torture. This is mental health. My job in this whole process is a very small one. I help them get a status in order to stay here, but their struggle continues. And to help them further, I believe it's the community that has to step up and help them. We have to learn how to recognize them and then help them, but we also need to continue to assist them to assimilate to our community. They are wonderful people. They just happen to be victims. And I find in my practice that they want to reach out for help, but sometimes they've been so abused and so traumatized that they don't know how to. And sometimes it takes a hand out from us first to be able to truly help all of these people. Thank you very much.